All right. Hello, hello, hello to any replayers that may be joining after this broadcast is over. If you are a replayer, you can participate. I love getting any feedback. So you can either tap on the screen for hearts if you're replaying. You can share with your followers or with any individuals that you think might find this helpful. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter, where I usually am available for questions and links, and especially the link for the spreadsheet because it's in progress. I'm only going to send it out by direct message on Twitter. And then for everybody else that's joining live, hello, hello, hello. Thank you for joining today. And let's see if I can find out who's on here. It's several live viewers. If you're new to me, or if you're just joining from my regular morning periscopes, as you are, welcome to my channel. My name is Joannazarach. I talk about money because I don't think enough people talk about money, and I don't mean like, there's lots of people that are like, oh, you can make more money. And I talk about how to keep more money, how to manage it, how to develop good mindsets and good habits. Because if you're not paying attention to your money, it will leave you. So the Money Matters broadcast that I do twice a week, generally at 5 p.m. Central Time on Tuesdays and Fridays, I talk about a topic that's a little bit more, I research it. I talk about a money topic that's been on my mind. I like to explore, and I like to share the knowledge with everybody else. So this is Money Matters 202. So it's a little bit of an advanced topic, and it was spurred by a friend of mine who was considering a move, and she said, what happens, like we talked about, selling and selling costs, and so what happens if you don't sell? Like what happens if you keep your primary home and rent it out? So I said, well, let's think about it. Let's do a spreadsheet. And we went through some of the scenarios. We started researching it and doing the considerations of what would happen if you went from homeowner to landlord with your primary residence. So I want to talk a little bit about it, and I do welcome discussion. If you have any questions or comments, I should do a disclaimer. I don't own rental property, so I'm not a landlord, and I've never been a landlord. We've lived in our property. My husband's owned this for 15 years. And my plan for this property is, if we are to move somewhere else, is to hold on to it and rent it out. So that's my mindset. That's kind of where it came from. But I personally, I'm not a landlord expert. So by any means, please, please, please do your research. And the best you can do is, if you're considering becoming a landlord, is really talk to someone who you trust about what is the reality of it. Take a class, read a book, like really educate yourself, because getting into real estate investing should never be done lightly and on a whim and on someone else's recommendation. So anyhow, let's just get into it. So what's the situation that I'm really talking about, and what is it I want to discuss today? Well, so basically the situation in hand for people who are considering this would be people who are currently a homeowner. So they've purchased the house, typically with a mortgage, right? There are very few people who buy their primary residences with cash. So this is your standard typical situation. You're a homeowner and you're considering a move, whether you're trying to upgrade, move to a different location within your same town, or you have a job-related move, and it's in your future. So you have some time to think about it and plan it. I think that's important to do that, to make sure you give yourself enough time. Because as we talk about in the 5 big money principles, big purchases are one of the most important drivers of wealth building. And when you go to sell a big purchase, like a house, then you may be linking it to another transaction. So the standard path today, sort of, if you ask 9 out of 10 people, like, what happens when you want to, when you're going to move, you sell a house and you buy another one. That's typically people who are kind of in the home ownership loop. Is the standard path is to sell your home because you need to sell it to be able to afford the next one. people typically will take the equity out of the first house and roll it into equity into the second house to lower their monthly mortgage payments. And people just kind of do it. They're like, oh, this is the way it's done. One of the things I'm trying to do on my broadcast is to really challenge your ideas of how money works and to really dig deep into how money really works and who's incentivized to make sure transactions happen. So, but basically what happens when you sell a house and then just buy another house, you're basically rolling your equity from one consumable asset to another. Okay, so what do I mean by a consumable asset? It's a term I started using recently because I feel like a lot of people look at their house that they live in and they're like, oh, I have an asset, it's part of my net worth. I have some equity. The thing is that money, that equity is tied up in an asset that you yourself are consuming. When you live in a home, you are consuming basically the best analogy would be if you could rent this house, then you could generate an income, but you're not. You're consuming the rent. You are living in the rent for free, right? So it's a consumable asset. And so what's a consumable asset? The typical ones are houses that we live in or cars. It's something that has some intrinsic value, so you can sell it, right? A lot of things are disposable things. They're not assets. They're just costs. But an asset is something that you can that has some intrinsic value, but you're consuming that value that could be generating by getting utility out of it, right? It's really, really important to think and understand that the house you live in is something that you're consuming. It's not an investment, right? And there's many an economist that's written about this idea that people think that a house is an investment. A house is not an investment. A house is something you're going to consume by getting the benefit of the capital assets that you put in, the cash that you put in, down payment, and the monthly mortgage payment that the bank gave you. The bank owns most of your house. And so just kind of reframe how you think about housing. So, and I said housing, not real estate. So real estate and the house you live in are two different things, right? Because most people misunderstand the difference between investable assets. So when you go buy real estate and real estate investing, it is about getting, purchasing a structure that will give you money, it will give you a return on an investment. So it'll generate some cash flow. It'll generate a return. And not one where you're actually using it that's consuming the value it could generate, right? So every house, like if you move down, and by the way, Airbnb is a great way for people to start realizing this and learning this, where they're like, wait a minute, if I'm not here and someone else could be here and they're paying me money, all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, I'm making money off my asset, right? So if you're not generating some cash, then you're not, there's not really a return. So that's really important for you to think. So, just to be clear, so that we're clear on this concept. Anybody have any questions or comments on the investable asset versus consumable asset? Is that pretty? I'm trying to kind of break it down because I feel like it's a huge move to go from being just a homeowner, which is something a lot of people aspire to being an investor in real estate, because that's really what's going to happen. You're not just like holding on to your house to have it, to visit it. You're going to become an investor. So what is the specific situation that we're talking about? So it means you own the house, which means you have some combination of equity and mortgage on it, and you currently live in it. You're considering to move to another area where you may buy another house or rent instead, right? I feel like people demonize renting, where it should be a more like a rational decision versus an emotional decision. Sometimes renting can be the right way to go. Depends which area you're living in, depends on your timing, right? There's a lot of churn in real estate transactions. There's a lot of cost to it. You should really only consider it as if you have enough cash flow and or savings that you're not depending on the sale of this house to keep you in good financial health. By no means should you jeopardize your financial health. The notion of investments that rent is considered. Yeah, I think so. But people don't understand that when they put so much capital, so much cash into the house that they're not getting a return on. Like they could invest that money in the market or some other investment and then generate money, and then they have to ask themselves, is rent a good idea? And the other reason is because our interest rates are so ridiculously low on mortgages that people really, and by the way, that's what's really driven the value of housing, is how low the interest rates were. So people could buy more house, aka pay more for it. But it is, people see it as a waste, but you're still consuming. You're consuming the housing that you live in, because you could move out and collect rent. I mean, I don't know why everybody doesn't live in their parents' basement and collect rent on their house, right? Like, if you're going to be that dramatic. But I do think it's something that's propagated, right? Because when money doesn't change hands on big transactions, there are no commissions to be made. There's no mortgages to sell, right? Like, all of a sudden, like, and by the way, there are swaths of real estate that are owned now by corporations. Used to be like slumlords and landlords that had a lot of housing, and they would extract rent from the population that didn't have it. So a house does create, many would not consider it as an investment, right? Well, that's the thing. I think that people who see it, like, people inadvertently make their housing an investment because it's money they have to pay. Otherwise, like, it's about choice. Like, I always talk about, like, if you don't have the discipline to not spend all the money that's coming to you, like, that's really the first thing you need to work on, because that means you don't value it as an investable. So, yeah, I think some people call it forced savings, right? But it's like, it's a really poor plan. Like, it's not going to create wealth. It can transfer some wealth. So historically, home ownership has been the only thing accessible to people to build and transfer wealth to the next generation, right? It guaranteed something. So, so it's not all bad. I'm just saying you need to be rational about it. So if you own the house, if you're moving anyway, and you have enough cash flow, you kind of have your financial plan. Like, that's what this is Money Matters 202. This isn't for beginners. Like, you need to get your stuff together. Then you have options. Oh, here's what I want you to consider. Why sell? First of all, like, why would you sell the house? And the next question is, when you sell, know how much it costs for you to sell a house. Selling a house is a major transaction. It is not quote unquote free. So for many people, the sale of their primary residence, their home, is the first time they have done any type of business dealing, right? Because actually, when you buy a house, it's a little bit like you don't realize what it's going to take to sell it. Like, and value in something is only as much as someone's willing to pay you for it. So when you're buying a house, it's all about the down payment and mortgage payment and finding the house of your dreams, right? So this is the first business dealing, and it can get really intimidating in terms of, like, understanding all the pieces. So if you're going to go sell a house, please, please, please educate yourself about all of the pieces in the sales process. You know, if you need entertaining education, there's like those real estate shows on Bravo, right? $1 Million Listing, and just like listen to what the agents talk about. Take a few hours. I mean, it might seem like if you've never really thought about it, observe those guys. See what words they use. See how they talk about their clients and the money that's flowing. It's important to understand it. So because I talk a lot about big purchases, this is one of the big 5 money levers when it comes to building wealth. It's the flip side of the big purchase transaction. So sale process, when you decide to sell, typically you get a real estate agent. And you kind of put your faith and trust in them, right? And we're not going to talk about selecting real estate agent. Like, the selecting real estate agent would show, it's called $1 Million Listing on Bravo. I'm sure there are other ones, but that one in particular, when I watched it, and I haven't watched it in a long time, I was watching it and I was like, man, like, the real estate agent just wants the money to change hands. They'll do anything to convince the buyer and the seller to make the deal happen, because that's the only time they make money, right? Like, a real estate agent only makes money when money changes hands. So they want the deal to happen. And when you're like, oh, of course they're going to look out after my best interest, right? They're going to try to convince you that, like, you made a right decision by lowering your, by offering more money, or by lowering, like, a lot of times the two agents, right, they make money when the transaction happens. So they kind of walk their clients through it by making them believe they got the best deal on the sales process and the buy process. That's hard to do. You're either, like, there's always a winner. So you have faith that they'll price your property to sell, right? And so what does it mean to price it to sell? There's usually a timing component, a market component, a bunch of stuff, and they take you through the process, and then they get a big fat check at the end, right? Both the buyer and the seller commission, the agents get commission. So because you gotta, like, wait, and you just gotta do the math, right? Because you just can't, like imagine the price of your house that you'll sell and do the mental math of how much you paid or how much your mortgage is. Like, don't do the mental math. Like, literally write down all of the things. Like, here's what I think my sales price is going to be. Here's the 6% commission I'm going to pay. And we're going to go through this calculator. Here is the other, like, it costs money to get your house in order to sell. You're going to do some minor repairs. Maybe you're, like, even thinking about upgrading. Let's not get into that. But it costs money to get your house ready for sale. And so don't do just the mental math. Do the real math on the spreadsheet to make sure you account for all the fees and all the costs and how much principal balance you still have on your mortgage, and what are you really going to walk away with in terms of your check, not just the overall transaction, but your check. So welcome to the big business of real estate transactions, because when you bought a house, all you worried was, do I love it? Do I have the down payment, and can I afford the monthly payment? In the sale transaction, you learn a lot. And so I do know about sale transactions because I've sold 2 houses in the past. And one of them, when I sold it in the down market, I had to write a check bigger than the buyer. Granted, the buyer didn't write a very big check. She still got one of those like low down payment loans. But I wrote a big check to sell my house because the commission had to be covered and the mortgage, and you do the math and you're like, and the market's down, so you can't get more money than someone's willing to pay for it. So real estate commissions and other costs, I do really want you to understand these. Whenever money changes hands, they're pesky little things called fees. And so a seller will incur all of the fees, by the way. The commission comes out of the sale price. It's not like the buyer brings the real estate agent and then writes them a check at the end. No, the 6% is typical. You can negotiate down, but nobody says you can do it. I think today, especially it's a seller's market, I would encourage it if you're selling a house to see, can someone do it for 5%? Maybe they're just as good. And then, the real estate agents try to keep it at 6%. It's in their best interest to have an industry standard. So that's a $6,000 for every $100,000 of house sold. Not how much money you get to keep, but what's the sale price. So if it's a $1 million house, that's $60,000. That's $60,000 you're going to pay someone for the services they're going to provide. Some people jump in and oh my God, I should become a real estate broker. It's not for the, that's for that one big house that you get to sell, depending on your market, which market you're in. But anyway, you put equity into the house, you have a mortgage, do the math. You're going to fix up the house. You really need to figure out what you're willing to put in. There might be some last minute concessions, staging, you may get lower price than asking. So make sure you account for all that. And then you may be ready to move and the house hasn't sold and you still have to pay for everything. So there's carrying costs, right? If the house is on the market, it's going to be some carrying costs there. Okay. When should you sell? So I'm not discouraging people from selling a house. I just say, look at the math and understand what's going to go into it. If you're considering, getting into real estate and investing, it might be really, you can ease into it with your primary residence. But when should you sell? Okay, number one, I put, if you're getting a divorce. That's a really common thing where people own real estate together and they're going through a divorce. And it may not be the most fiscally, ideal situation to sell the house. But you know what? You just got to finish it. So going through a divorce almost always will trump any rational calculations. You need to sell it. You need to dissociate yourself from the joint partnership and move on. When should you sell? You really can't afford that property and another property. Remember, you're consuming that asset. So make sure you understand your own cash flow. Number 3 is you haven't really taken care of your other financial obligations like retirement planning, and then you may be better off pulling that equity out of the house and really getting your financial house in order, right? I really think that this is advanced and you shouldn't be doing it if you're and I have my, because I can put it on a credit card and I have a balance transfer and all this. If you're trying to come up with money with funky little ways and you still have a bunch of student loan debt, you have no retirement plan, you're not tax efficient, all of these things, I would say you might want to consider taking care of them first. The area that you're leaving, when you should you sell? The area you're leaving doesn't sustain market rates for the rents required to cover your cash flow, right? So you may have bought a house and the rents have never taken off, and you need to know what the rental potential is, and it may not be worth it for you to keep the house. You may be better off to sell it. You're not good at multitasking or managing things, right? Some people are just kind of distraught and they're running around and they they're just like one more thing for them to do. Not the time, not the right time. If you're really stretched thin between career, family, other responsibilities, it may not be a good time to get into the real estate investing. You have better things to do with your money. You may already have a plan for your money, right? Maybe you do want to invest it in the stock market. Maybe you want to start a business. Maybe you have a plan to contribute heavily to tax-deferred accounts. Maybe you want to fund an education. I don't know. There's other things. Maybe real estate market, you believe it's going to peak, and you want to get out and cash out and not worry about it. You feel like the gain's worth getting out of the market, right? Sometimes it's just like you want to just get out, and then if several months of carrying costs would devastate you, right? Again, evaluate your own financial situation before you do it. Okay, so what happens if you keep it? We're programmed so much in the following of the script. The few people stop and examine the rational decision behind the disposal of an asset, right? When you're no longer going to be living in a house, start thinking of it as an asset, as an investment. So you really need to be at that time. We need to be ready, right? You need to be arrived at the stage of your financial life that you feel like you're ready to become a real estate investor instead of just a real estate consumer, right? There's no magic number, like you don't know where you've arrived, right? There's not like at this net worth or at this risk profile or at this income. You really need to do the hard math behind the numbers and see what you're comfortable with, not just the best case scenario. A lot of people go into real estate investing with best case. You need to do the worst case. You say, what's going to happen if this house is sitting vacant, right? Do I need to lower my rents? Like, what are you capable of keeping up? You keep it if you can flex your finances to support an empty house, right? Or do something creative. Again, these days, with Airbnb, you can get more creative than just like listed in the rental back of the newspaper and hope for the best. So you can possibly do short-term rentals, Airbnb, know your demographic of who do you think is going to rent and what's your town or city, how's it faring in that regard. Keep it when your risks are covered, right? When you don't need to plunder the equity in this house for emergency. Like if you don't need the cash. Like you really need to be in a good financial place. That's how I feel about it. That would be my advice. And again, I feel like it's like such a great way to ease into real estate because like why would you want to make your primary residence your first investment property? Okay, because you already own it, right? Remember the money changing hands and fees. So if you've already acquired it, you know what it actually takes financially. Parlez-vous français? You know what it takes to run it financially, right? In terms of money. You know all the dirty little secrets of what appliances work and, does it have any structural issues? So like it's a known entity for you. You know the neighborhood and the neighbors, you know kind of what kind of rents you may be able to get, what the people in the neighborhood can afford or not, what type of professions they are. And that's just a lot of knowledge. Like that knowledge is gold and you shouldn't undervalue it. So if you've lived there for a few years, you have just a really lay of the land when it comes to the real estate values of that neighborhood. So it's a lot of knowledge to walk away from. That's why I would recommend it for people who want to get into real estate investing. You can ease into it with your primary residence when you move. You gotta go into this experience with the investor mindset, right? Which means do the math. You're now in the business of generating positive cash flow, not in the business of making your house pretty, which is like a lot more people consume when it comes to their houses, because it's not just the place they live that they consume, but then they're adding all kinds of, renovations and all kinds of things to it. And the house just draws a lot more cash into it. But you're not that anymore. You're going to be looking at making actual profit from your property. I would not recommend like the try both, like, oh, maybe we'll sell, maybe we'll rent, just like you've got to commit. You've got to do the math and you've got to commit to one path or the other. You may have a get out clause, like say, I'm going to try it for 2 years and then I'm going to get out. I'm going to talk about it. And as the investor, you will need to answer some questions about the deal, right? How will you manage the property, right? What are all the costs besides all the costs you are incurring? All of a sudden you're in the business of renting it out. There might be marketing costs, property management, insurance, vacancy, etc. Do the math. Does it make sense to cash flow it positive or negative, right? Do the math. I cannot emphasize that enough. And don't do it in your head. And don't do it even on a piece of paper. Do it in a spreadsheet. Google Docs. You can do it for free. I'm setting up this Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to show it to you If you want a version of it, I'm happy to send you the link in a direct message. I don't want to post on my Twitter because I just don't think it's ready, but like I want to hold people, like I want some people to try it out. The big variable there are two big variables that no one thinks about when it comes to sale of the house. So one is taxes. I love talking about taxes. Why am I bringing up taxes when it comes to sale of your primary residence and investing? When you're making, so first of all, sale of a primary residence is special because you're consumable and you live in it. There's exemptions in the tax code that allow you to take a capital gains. That's the difference between the sale price of your house, and the purchase price. So whatever you purchased it for and we're going to sell it, the difference between those two is considered a capital gains. Yes, there's some exceptions if you do like huge additions, like if you do a significant upgrade to the house, you can add that to your basis. But, in general, that's the difference. A lot of people like overvalue that. And a lot of people don't really get that much capital gains, especially when we went through this like really rough market. So the capital gains exemption is, it's also like, so read the rules, right? Because you basically have to reside at your residence for 3 out of the last 5 years in order for you to qualify. So the exemption for single person is $250,000. That means $250,000 you could collect tax-free. That's nothing that's really important for you to consider. Or $500,000 if you're married, filing jointly, right? So make sure you understand that and have it in your plan. That's why when I do my calculator, I say sell now, sell in 2 years when you're still within that exemption period, and sell in 10 years. Because if you're not going to exempt yourself, if you're going to have capital gains kick in, you got to think long and hard about the value. Oh, thank you. So provision for so there's also provisions in the tax code. If you do decide that real estate investing is for you, you need to look into like the conversion into another real estate property. And I put TBD on this because I'm not sure. Like I have to read into it. There's like section 1025. There's some weird section of the tax code that lets you do that. But that's like if you decide to be in the real estate investing business. But the taxes, that's why I'll bring up taxes. Like you need to understand, you have to have a tax plan for how you're going to dispose of this property and everything else. Getting out of the business of being a landlord and real estate investor. So if you think that you're going to get out of that business, you really need to consider like what's your exit plan. So just that's what I was talking about. And in rental profits, so the difference that you're making between the cash flowing in and the cash flowing out is taxable, right? That's rental income. So also consider how that's being taxed, how it's going to impact you in the future when you create that taxable income. But because the income is taxable, here's an important thing, it creates room for expenses associated with your rental business. So read Schedule E in the 1040, and you should, like, whenever you read a schedule, you've never had experience it, it'll teach you something. Look at the types of expenses that you can deduct against your rental income, right? So do that. I want you to really look at that. Travel. So if you're out of town, like traveling to take care of your property, right? The repairs and maintenance that you're making versus like right now, if you make repairs and maintenance costs, they're after-tax dollars. So I would consider that, just take taxes into consideration. And then the other variables, investment. Like what would you do with the money, right? Because the real part of the equation is if you took that money, that cash out at the sale, and you actually had the discipline to invest it, like in an alternative vehicle, so stocks or some other investment, and maybe it gave you 8% return, you may be better off, right? Like, be honest with yourself, though. If you're gonna, net out, let's say $150,000, and the first $50,000 you're just gonna spend, because again, this discipline of having the money tied up in real estate versus having to decide how to allocate it, you may be better off keeping the house because you're just gonna be less likely to spend that capital. So be honest with yourself and only calculate based on the amount you plan on investing. If you're looking at that difference, if you're like, oh, of course, because the rate of return is 8%, right? But are you actually going to do that? But then keep in mind that real estate is an illiquid investment. That's, that can be good and bad because of that, right? Because it's kind of tied up, but it can keep generating the rents. You just may not be able to get your capital, that's the amount that you're investing, both through the down payment or the home equity, as well as the principal that you're paying every month. You may not be able to get that out. So let me just flip to this calculator. So here's what I'm working on. I'm working on this calculator. Okay, let's see. All right. So basically, like, I started putting like relevant year. So what you need to do is first just start with your purchase information and what do you think you're going to sell. So purchase information, so things that are in blue are either calculated or like they're known. And then things that are in yellow, they're guesses. So other things that are calculated from it obviously are guesses. But like first you have to kind of predict what do you think the housing market's going to do in your area in terms of percentage growth year over year. And, you know, if you use historical data, it's probably less than 1%. It just kind of gives you an idea of if you held on to it, what would be the house value of it like a couple years out. So you would put like what you think your house is worth. Oh, thanks. What you think your house is worth today, and then you can project it out what's it worth in 2 years and 10 years. Again, I'm doing the 210 because of taxes. And then you do a gross gain on the sale. And then balance on your mortgage. That's very important because your mortgage balance is going to go down over time as well. So when you go to sell in the future, you're going to get a sort of a bigger cash out. But that's why we want to compare it against investments. Because I made a profit line here where after all the other expenses, like, so let's say if this is the value of your house and you still have $380,000 left on your mortgage, and then with with the commission and everything else, here's what I expect you should be able to walk away with, right? Because you put in a bunch of equity, right? Like a lot of times people are like, oh, this big profit. Yeah, but you brought so much equity with you to the table. And then I have this like 8% rate investment. And again, that presume no taxes. So 8% is only good if it's like in a tax vehicle, in like an IRA or 401k, because if you're getting taxed on the investment return, it's not going to be 8%. It's going to be more like 6%. So it's like a comparison. You can see that there's somewhat, sell in 2016 and invest cash at 8%. You see that you're actually better off in 10 years in this particular scenario because I only put 1% for housing growth. Now, people who are really aggressive on real estate, they say, oh, it's going to go up a lot, right? And you can play with this percentage for what you think you're going to be in the next couple years, but it's not a guarantee. It's just somewhere to kind of look around and say, oh, look, if the market really goes up a lot, 5% over the year, so 5% year over year, and I go to sell it, I actually would be better off with a higher profit, and that's just pure profit from the capital gains on that particular property from selling it, over the 17-year span from where you bought it, than just investing it in a pure market with a tax-deferred vehicle. And the thing that we haven't really talked about is this calculation that you really, really need to do is to look at your carrying cost, or kind of what does it cost for you to have the house in a year. And this particular example, again, I just kind of made up some numbers, is like $35,000, what it costs you just to carry the house. And then I do like rental revenue over here. I said, okay, the big variable is going to be how much can you rent it for? So I put like, maybe you can rent this house for $5,000, right? I don't know. Whatever your situation is, that's what you need to do the calculation. And then you need to consider the vacancy, like how many months it's going to be vacant. So this is the maximum rent you're going to collect, right? Like that's the top. And then you're going to pay some marketing costs. Usually that's like 1 month's rent for a rental agency to get you a renter in. So I put $5,000, but I said, it's vacant. And then maintenance costs, you got to estimate it because again, this house, so you kind of have an idea of what's going to cost. And then property management, because you need to decide if that's one of your new jobs. Like if you live in the same town, you can take this job on. If not, you got to figure out how much do people charge for this. I don't know, but this is the challenge I put to my friend who's considering it. So we're going to be updating this maybe with her, with some of the data that's a little more accurate. Anyway, I made this spreadsheet because I really enjoy making spreadsheets, as you well know if you've been following me. And like I said, if you message me on Twitter, if you follow me and you can message me on Twitter and you want a link of this because you want to play around with a copy, I will send it to you because I like to share my spreadsheets. And then you can give me feedback if it makes sense or not, because this is how Joanna's mind works in terms of spreadsheets and numbers. A lot of times I have to explain to people exactly what numbers they'd have to put in. So that's the Periscope for the day. I'm going to something about being a parent that makes you responsible for little people and need to go pick them up. But thank you for everyone who joined. If you joined live, if you're on the replay, hey, if you're watching it on Twitter feed, follow me on Twitter. Find me on Snapchat. I'm at joannazarach everywhere. And on Snapchat, I love Snapchat. Why do I love Snapchat? I've only been on Snapchat for like a month. But the like short form video where you can just ask a question and I can answer it, it's actually a very quick way of communicating with people. And again, it's easy to find me versus like, what's your number? Can I text you? You know, like it's just an easy place to go. And I go on Snapchat like every day. So it's also a fun way to get a hold of me and see what else I'm working on. So thanks again. It's Friday, so hope you enjoy your weekend. And for those that know, I do my Money Habits broadcast 7 days a week, so I will be on tomorrow at 10 a.m. talking about money habits, developing better money habits, making sure you're keeping more of your money, and not spending it all in investing. I'm trying to convert people from being consumers to being investors because hey, that's how you achieve financial freedom. There's no trick to it. I want more people to have financial freedom and financial independence because I think we all can. We can aspire to it, and but you have to move from the consumer mindset to investor mindset. And here is one way, right? This is the housing. When you look at housing and you say, "Wow, what can I do with this house? It's an asset. Maybe I can become an investor." Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great weekend. And like I said, you get any questions, you know where to find me. See you tomorrow. Bye.